This conference will now be recorded.
We'll call to order the Stratford Avenue at 104. This order of business is approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Someone? Anyone? Mr. Watson, very well. Is there a second?
I'll approve, Mary Dean.
Any discussion, any corrections, changes? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 No, carries unanimously.
Aye.
Okay, we'll go back to following this, continuing with our discussion of the book. Just one item, I'm going to make a personal request here. Just speaking for myself, we need to pick up the pace on this. I got invited to go to a class for the next 3 weeks from 1 to 2:30 on Thursdays. And this is just, I feel like we're not getting anywhere fast here. I'm just a little frustrated. And I know part of it is just the method with how we're trying to do this 1 hour a week. And it's starting to eat into my work schedule. So I really want to wrap this book up as fast as we can and start plotting out our next moves. And maybe we need to look at if there's a better way to conduct these meetings, because this is starting to become a problem. So let's just keep moving and try to make some progress, some real progress. Okay.
Got it.
Thank you.
Ready to go?
Glenn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, everybody. I have us right now today on page 24. The two items which are on page 24 are echoes of things we had talked about before. So encouraging nonprofit and other organizations to help Stratford with its, housing development. Sometimes faith-based groups and others will undertake projects we talked about on page 16. So we were sort of okay with this concept, so we can skip over that one, I think, unless anybody else has something they'd like to bring up. And then the second strategy on this page is again a repeat. We talked about it under strategy 2.1.6 in this briefing book, and we had quite a bit of discussion here in terms of ways that we might encourage the acquisition deed restriction of units. We might try to use some CDBG funds or other things to try to prevent people from actually getting into foreclosure situations, some of that other stuff. So I think, again, we've talked this through. I think the strategies are probably similar to our discussion, which I think was on either page 17 or 19. So I'm ready to flip over, if you are, to page 25. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
So page 25 is possibly a significant strategy for Stratford to consider. It is this concept of what's called inclusionary zoning. Some people have characterized zoning over the years as being exclusionary. It's a tool used to prevent people from coming into a community. And inclusionary zoning is sort of the opposite of that. And the statutes allow for a municipality to do almost anything it wants with regard to trying to find ways to be inclusionary in terms of housing. So I think that some of the things that some communities have done is they've adopted a requirement that new housing development, it could be all housing development or a multifamily development, that a certain percentage of the units need to be reserved as units which are priced at affordable levels. Part of the thought process on this is that if the state has a 10% affordability goal for municipalities around the state, every housing development that gets built that doesn't meet the 10% is actually putting the municipality farther behind. Some communities have actually adopted a standard which is actually higher than 10% because they recognize that we're trying to catch back up to, the state goal and be exempt. Darien actually is a community that has a 12% requirement. Darien is actually working on their second moratorium under H30G because they've been able to produce units. New Canaan and Fairfield both have adopted regulations that, as part of any zoning permit, require an affordable housing fee be paid. And I think it's maybe 1% of the fee payment or 10% of the fee payment, somewhere. It's not a large percentage, but they have accumulated monies which they have used to fund planning by housing authorities in those communities or to undertake projects. Fairfield's still trying to figure out what to do with their money because of some construction which occurred, I think, at Sacred Heart and Fairfield College. I think their fee is up over $750,000, which is money that just sort of showed up in terms of what to do with it. And I think there are other strategies in terms of density bonuses and other things like that that could happen. So one of the strategies that Stratford could consider is some of these inclusionary concepts in the zoning regulations with regard to development. I think some incremental steps towards the bottom of the page could be a set aside requirement. If the subdivision comes into the planning commission, state statutes allow the commission to require the reservation of open space. And this is not unlike that in terms of the reservation of units as affordable housing. And if we wanted to take a bigger step, then we might go above the 10%. But it is a new concept. The communities in Connecticut are exploring it more. What's the committee's feelings with regard to the concept of inclusionary zoning?
And this is Jay Hibansky quickly. I just wanted to mention that, our office presented inclusionary zoning practice about 3 or 4 years ago, and there didn't seem to be an appetite. And we presented Fairfield's model as something that we would kind of base it off of, and there didn't seem to be much of an appetite to take it on at that point.
Who was that presented to?
Go ahead, Mayor, and then Beth.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Jay, the timing may have been a little different than it is now. We now have a housing partnership. 2, we've also talked about add-on fees for different things, whether it's art, streetscaping, and I think this is a different opportunity presented by not just to one commission, but a partnership as well as different commissions. So I'm more open. I'm open to this. I'm open to this discussion. Thanks.
Beth?
Yeah, we've discussed this previously about, I think it was 4 meetings ago, and I think in the next draft of this booklet or in what we present to the community, we should be presenting that as an option in exactly what the ratios will be and what the add-on fees will be. That's to be determined, but also to be determined, as we discussed previously, is who will be the guardian of the funds and how they will be distributed. So there's a lot of work to do there, but I think that does need to be part of our presentation to the community.
It is a way, I think, to address housing without the municipality bearing the entire burden of addressing this situation. It becomes a situation that the community does participate in some ways as new development occurs. And so I think we can throw this out on the table as being an option. And as Beth says, the percentages or the standards or the requirements could wait till later. And we could show what other municipalities have done just to kind of frame the discussion and see where it leads.
Part of that discussion, though, may also include fees for substantial rehabilitations of property that will be that could be turned into housing. For example, lofts. So it wouldn't just simply be new structures. It could be structures that are being transitioned to housing.
Yep, I think then that could be either way, Beth. Either whether it's a zoning fee attached to the building permit fee. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to say that if units are being created, then a certain percentage of those units. So whether it's conversion to lofts or whatever else might happen, it could be occurred that way. But again, I think I like your approach is to say, okay, Jay indicated the community had this discussion a year or so or a couple of years ago or whatever. And then the mayor says, the circumstances have changed a little bit. So let's put it on the agenda for further discussion and see where that leads. Anything else in terms of the concept of inclusionary zoning? So I think on page 26, if you're ready to go here, go ahead, Harold.
Just one quick comment. I think that this actually cuts across all of our building in Stratford, not just in our giant units. So I agree with Beth and the mayor in terms of this is very critical, I think, presenting this to the town. I also think that if you, Glenn, could include any results that we know about how it's affected Fairfield in terms of what has it resulted in. Do we have any track record yet in adopting something like this?
Yep, be happy. So I've got experience in several communities that have done different things on this, and I think that's a great idea, Harold, of how we could do sort of case studies. And the case studies in terms of the plan that the housing partnership may suggest for consideration would illustrate these case studies as to how this might happen.
So Glenn, I just have a comment. I think it just depends on the development climate. And if our development climate is where there is more demand and people would come in anyway, then they wouldn't mind giving that extra fee. But if our development climate is not still at that point, then I think we may be taxing ourselves by putting an additional fee for developments where they can do business elsewhere with a different price range. And also the second comment is about the density bonuses. I want to know the opinion of the group here, how they would feel about a density bonus in a TOD zone, not in other locations, but just in a TOD zone. If somebody is, willing to provide affordable units.
How much more dense do you think we can go in the TOD? I mean, I know I've mentioned before that I'm thinking that neighborhood is starting to get maxed out.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we can't create another one because there's only one train station.
Yeah, I think the idea here about a density bonus, there may be some circumstances or situations that a density bonus is not required. The demand for the TOD with the number of projects that have come along is an indication that there's strong demand in the marketplace. The application of an affordability requirement does impact the selling price or the renting price of a percentage of the units, but it's 10% or less or 10% or more, depending on what the partnership decides. So I think that as part of our discussion moving forward, we can get feedback from the community as to what impact that might have, and then whether or not a density bonus might be necessary in certain situations. Top of page 26. So anytime we adopt a percentage requirement, for example, if we were to say that 10% of the units would be set aside, if somebody is proposing a 17 unit project, that would mean 1.7 units. Well, you can't create a 0.7 unit. So some communities have either rounded it up or rounded it down, but some communities have also established a fee for a fractional unit. Is that, okay, you can do whatever it is that you want to do, but you would perhaps pay a fee for a fractional unit. So this is, rather than sort of leaving something on the table, a way to address that issue. Beth, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, this is just part of the whole discussion on inclusionary zoning. Yeah, so it's superseded. That discussion supersedes this.
Yeah, I think it's part of the, it's an option, if you will. Very good point, Beth. It's an option, if you will, under the inclusionary concept. So I think we'll keep this on the table in the mix, if you will, as a possible component of an inclusionary program. Is that where I think the, yep. And same thing perhaps on 3.13 on the bottom of page 26. This is again what New Canaan and Fairfield have done. And I'll just roll it into the overall program. Page 27. This is perhaps a bit of a challenging conversation, but here we go. So in 1988, apologize, There was a court case where the home builders took the town of East Hampton to court and said that their floor area requirements were unconstitutional. And the courts reviewed the regulatory requirement and found no rational relationship between floor area requirements and public health, safety, and welfare. What they said was there's other elements of the building code, the health code, and all the other stuff that address these issues from those perspectives. And there isn't a clear connection to zoning requirements. And that's the Connecticut Supreme Court. So that's I guess the highest court in the land, if you define the land as the state of Connecticut. So the question here is we do have a number of examples in the zoning regulations where there are floor area requirements. I feel it's my obligation to tell you what the Supreme Court has decided, but I leave it to you, the housing partnership, to decide whether or not you think it's something where the town can or should remove those requirements, modify them, or address them in any way, shape, or form. I think as part of a zoning application, you could review the floor area elements directly or indirectly. The direct is when you have a standard in your regulation and if you require 800 square feet and somebody gives you 750 square feet, presumably it doesn't comply with your regulations, so you could turn it down on that basis, but you may end up in court. The other way to deal with it is part of a special permit or other application to look at the design of the development. We are able to regulate the number of units, so somebody can't get more units by minimizing the square footage. But it might be an area where if people are in fact desiring smaller units with higher quality features, this regulation may not be as applicable as it might have been. How would you like to configure the report or the issues related to living space requirements? Yep, go ahead, Beth. Go ahead, Beth.
Oh, I'm sorry. Our zoning regulations should comply with what the Supreme Court of Connecticut said, especially given that we have rotating zoning commissioners.
Okay. So I think our next step in our overall process here will be to reorganize the materials that we've been talking about in a much more user-friendly, concise way. And this will be part of the mix, and then we'll see what sort of comments and feedback we get from that. Is everybody okay with that direction? Chris, we're up to page 28 already. So page 28 is the concept of the town enhancing its local capacity. And one of the ways that we can do this is establishing a housing trust fund. So monies could come in for fees in lieu of affordable housing, or donations that may come into the community, or CDBG funds, or other types of money. And the housing trust fund can build up over time. And it could be, perhaps, depending on the decision of the council, if the expenditure recommendations come from the housing partnership to the council, those funds could be expended in housing ways. But the housing trust fund essentially is a pot of money which would sit on the side and accumulate. It's not part of the annual operating budget of the town. It's a special fund dedicated to housing related issues. I'm not aware that Stratford has this today. I didn't see it in the budget materials I looked at. So I think this is an easy way, if you will, for us to find a place to put monies that we may be able to accumulate for housing related issues. How's the committee feel about this? Yep, go ahead, Beth.
Again, this is superseded by any discussion of an inclusionary zoning structure. And I know in New Jersey, it's actually a nonprofit that handles all of this. It's not a government function.
Yeah, so I think
and it doesn't need to be a government function.
I think I might differ with you on that, in the sense that if the town is going to require the fund as part of a zoning permit fee, then it probably would keep the money. In other words, we wouldn't take a fee in lieu of open space and then give the money to the land trust. It might be a little different in that scenario. So I think if the state law suggests that that can happen in New Jersey, then I think it's okay. But I think in Connecticut, I think we probably need an authority and responsibility thing. If the town is going to require the fee, then the town collects the fee and decides how to expend the fee. So again, the housing partnership may be part of that. So it may just be two steps where New Jersey does one.
Yeah, you're right. It was part of the New Jersey law or regulations that it went to that nonprofit. But the town, of course, after collecting the fee, could just have a contract with the nonprofit to administer.
Yep.
It's not
Much like we
always
spend the
embroiled in the
CDBG
weeds
funds
of
today.
this.
Yep.
Pardon me?
Just like we spend the CDBG funds today.
Yeah,
We have the funds
exactly.
and that comes
Do
in
the
from the federal
analysis.
government, gets allocated that way. This would be funds coming in differently, but we could decide, the housing partnership could decide. Are we okay with the housing trust fund recommendation? Okay.
Yes, but I think we should also put in there that this is limited to housing funding, that it would be a specific.
Absolutely. Harold, I totally agree with you, because
Right.
if anybody suspects that we're taking open space funding or any other kind, then we won't have people really open to this housing partnerships.
And honestly, my question is, our public housing does have a not-for-profit arm. Are we talking about two distinct funds here? I don't know. So the mayor actually could probably tell me, or Elizabeth could tell me, and could answer this.
We just started a nonprofit. It's not fully operational yet, and we have no funds in it as of the moment.
And the other part of that too, Harold, is that the housing authority is not, even though you wouldn't know it because we work together, but the housing authority is totally separate from the town. There's really no connection, except that we work together.
So we would have to establish our own fund that we could give to the Stratford Housing not-for-profit if we wanted, as one of our people that we select to help fulfill our needs. That was my question, just thinking generally about all of this. Thank you.
I think that is the case, Harold. I think I'm familiar with New Canaan. New Canaan has had a zoning permit fee for many years. When the Housing Authority was looking at expanding and redeveloping their project, which was quite old, had become a little obsolete in terms of needs of the community today. The fund was used to do a preliminary project design and confirm how the project could be redeveloped to better meet community needs. And they were able to accelerate that. And the project is now built and on the ground. So in other words, the funds, if they'd had to wait to find the money to undertake the design work, it would have extended the period. But they recognized this scenario. The money was there. It was going to produce housing to benefit the community, and they ran with it. And I think, again, that this fund could perhaps do the same type of thing for Stratford. I do believe Fairfield shared with me recently the language on what they created, the language on their housing fund. So I'll get that together and include that so that we can see the limitations, if you will, in the report.
May I suggest that there be a separate discussion amongst us about, because a lot of this has to do with charging in lieu fees and inclusionary zoning, and perhaps what might be useful is to have examples of inclusionary zoning that other communities or states have done, and so we kind of can see what the parameters are, and if there are any evaluations of those policies to see what is most effective. But that would be a separate discussion, I think.
Yeah, I think, let me see what I can find, Beth, because I do think this concept, it's possible that the concept of inclusionary zoning is a different way for the town to operate in terms of zoning approvals. And so it might be one of the things which is higher up and closer to the front of our whatever report we put together next. And I do think that when we get feedback from the community, having case studies on those things would help people visualize and understand.
Yeah, because we're essentially talking about charging in lieu fees. So, and then having a guardian for those fees, an overseer for those monies.
Yeah. Just making a note myself. On page 29, at the top of the page, I think that for communities that have experienced affordable housing applications under 830G, or for private developments which include affordable units, one of the key considerations is how will the affordability of those units be guaranteed over time? So under 830G of the statutes, a developer proposing an affordable housing development has to provide a housing affordability plan. And I think that I've seen situations in other municipalities where each developer prepares their own plan. The plans are different, and the administration has to fall to somebody as to who's going to administer this plan. So I think it's helpful for a community to have a model housing affordability plan. Ridgefield just adopted one. I think it's a interesting model for us to use. I would probably make some tweaks to it. But what they say to a developer proposing an affordable housing plan is use our model in preparing your plan. We know it complies with the statute. We know how to administer it. You can take exception to something if you want, but other than that, we're going to sort of use our model plan. So I would suggest that that's something that Stratford could aspire to. If we're going to have an inclusionary requirement where developments are going to have affordable units, but they all have different definitions or different methodologies, it could become a bit of a nightmare. So having a standard document or model here, I think is probably a helpful step for Stratford to consider. How do you feel about that?
Glenn, I have a question.
Sure.
Can this affordable housing plan be a section of the overall housing plan that we're doing for Stratford
It's
in
enough.
our work?
I mean, I think it's probably beyond what I agreed to provide at the beginning, Susmitha. But I think the fact that Ridgefield has one is a model for us to work from. So I think initially, certainly the concept is something that we can explore. We can attach the Ridgefield document as a case study or an example of what another community has done. But to adapt it specifically to Stratford, I think whoever does that would want to have conversations with Liz and other people in the community to make sure that the language is vetted before Stratford adopts it.
Okay.
Are we okay with this concept?
No, not really. I mean, I think developing a model is the least of our worries. That we should focus on what we want to do and what we need to do for our community.
I would agree, Beth, but I think to launch Stratford into a situation that we end up with an administrative nightmare is probably not a good situation here overall. So I think I wish the state had done this years ago. The statute, when they adopted 830G in 1989, said that they would, but they never did. And so for communities that have had multiple 830Gs, it's become a nightmare. So I guess I'm just trying to short circuit future problems here. So I would strongly encourage that this be suggested in the plan, and then the town can decide later on how they want to approach that. Go ahead, Harold.
My take from planning, and I hope Chris will agree with me, is that this is the singular sore spot that comes before us time and time and time again. So whatever clarity we can give to the 830G process is, I think, one of the things we need, not just from a commissioner point of view, but also from a developer point of view. They walk in every time. There is such great unknown, and it also affects the public. We need to have more clarity to present to the public in terms of this.
So I'm sensing a general direction of yeah, but not overwhelming support. Is that fair?
Guys, I'm sorry, I'm got stuff going on here. What was your general point? I'm sorry, Glenn.
No, I think this is an important document for Stratford to have because it
Yeah.
avoids problems down the road where affordability, somebody comes along with an 830G development, forces it upon the town, but then the affordability is
Yep.
lost within months or years, or the administration becomes a nightmare in terms of changes in ownership or changes in rental. So having a model document and the bottom of the page, a standard administrator, I think allows the town to carefully manage this process so that it accomplishes the results we seek.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to have, for the life of the restriction, it's going to have to be monitored, probably even more as a, it's a task more than a document, I think, probably. And I think we would probably need to be aggressive with, defending what we have as affordable and make sure the classifications, because I mean the final arbiter is probably the state. They come and say, okay, well here's your percentage, and if we don't have the documentation to support it, we're going to be in not in any position to defend the number, and to be proactive about what we're considering complies with 8-30G. So yeah, the data, and then just the monitoring and being very proactive about it is ideal, because whether we like it or not, we are in a somewhat adversarial relationship with the state on this one. They're going to tell us, I mean, they have a, I don't want to use the word agenda, it sounds a little bit too harsh, but they are trying to, encourage, in theory, affordable housing. And they have to control the rules and definitions, and then we just have to make sure that we can actually have the evidence to support that we are meeting it or not meeting it, or making sure that we are coming closer to hitting that 10% number as best as we can.
And I think that the state does have their own bucket, Chris, and I think Stratford has their own bucket.
Yeah.
And I think the balance between the town and the state is clearly an important consideration. But I think my concern for Stratford overall is that if housing units end up in Stratford's bucket, what tools do we have in place to make sure that those units are administered properly? And I think first of which is a model housing affordability plan. Everybody has the same definition of income. Everybody has the same definition of qualifying unit. Everybody has the same affirmative fair housing marketing plan. That if there is a unit transition in terms of how we're going to document income, this is what's going to happen. I found two situations actually in other communities. One where there was no administrator, there was no plan, and sellers basically ignored the resale price restrictions. And before long, the units were no longer affordable. Nobody was watching the show. So that's one thing which I think is not helpful. And I think the second situation is I had another situation in another community where the developer designated themselves as the administrator, but there was nobody watching over the developer in terms of the rental rates. So that's the situation I think that these two recommendations here on page 29 are intended to avoid. We're going to have a qualified administrator who's going to do this in a way that's honest and true to Stratford's ideals. And we're going to have a model document, and people are going to follow it. And I think that now we end up with a better process.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I think what you're talking about is having pretty tight guidelines and then having a database of sorts that would actually be monitored, where the units are verified, that there'd be some sort of verification process. It's about accountability.
It's quite possible. Some communities use third-party administrators. Some towns actually use the housing authority. They are used to qualifying people's income for eligibility. So all they need to do, I don't know how long it would actually take, Liz, but within an hour or a couple of hours or less than a day, whatever, somebody could actually verify somebody's income, and boom, they get a little certificate or chit, and they're off and running for occupancy of the designated affordable unit. In one of the situations that I've seen, the builder's secretary was the person administering, and she had no experience with documenting income and what to look for. And it became, again, a bit of a nightmare. So I think both of these are good housekeeping procedures overall, which are probably useful and helpful.
Sure, I was getting hung up on the word model. So if you're talking about having an accountability system, yes, definitely you need an accountability system for this.
You know what, Beth? That's such a great observation. I'm using the word model, and I think what I probably mean here is standard. We're going to use a standard or a common. Okay. Thank you very much. So the comment at the bottom. Go ahead, Beth. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Then you also need roles and responsibilities delineated. So there's somebody who would actually be doing the monitoring.
Yep.
I don't know if you want to put that in the document just yet, though.
I think we're going to advocate.
Not in this document yet, but.
Beth, I think, and Laura, I think if we advocate that there should be somebody who's got clear responsibility, but who that is doesn't have to be decided just yet. Because I think what some communities do, for example, the housing authority in one community says for $250, we'll do the process, and boom, whoever the buyer, seller, whoever is going to pay that fee, the documentation happens, they're certified, they're good to go. So it happens in an appropriate way.
And in Stratford, how we used to handle it before I started here is the planning and zoning administrator would do it. And when I started, I was getting tax returns and things dropped off at my office, which was, outside of what I was comfortable doing. So now what the zoning commission does is the zoning commission has to approve a third party affordability administrator, and we've gotten a list from the Department of Housing of recommended firms that are highly qualified to ensure compliance. And that's worked really well. I've been really happy with that change. So that's just an update to the board here.
Thanks, Jay, because I think that's the type of thing that we're talking about. But rather than, let's say, everybody picking different people off the list, we might just say, listen, the housing authority is our, vendor of choice. And so we may approach that. So we can make the decision who later. I'm ready to go to page 30. So we have a situation here that for a development in Connecticut to qualify as an affordable housing development under the statute, the unit has to be deed restricted for at least 40 years. Stratford zoning regulation actually does have an affordable housing provision, which requires that a unit be deed restricted for 20 years. Some communities actually require that the unit be deed restricted in perpetuity. And so the question ends up being, if somebody is going to propose an affordable housing development, which means they don't have to follow the zoning regulations strictly, and then after 40 years, they can sell the unit at market price, or somebody can, there's a huge windfall occurring at some point in time in the future to somebody. And so what some communities have said is, if you're going to put the additional density or other elements in this that you don't have to follow the local zoning, the statutes say minimum of 40 years, and we're going to require more than 40 years. What are your thoughts on extending the affordability period?
Extending it past 40 years?
Yep. Yes, Laura.
Are we within our rights to do that as a zoning commission?
Yep. A number of communities have done it. So the issue is for an 830G application. So the issue ends up being, for example, if I am the developer of the development and I'm going to sell it, then whoever at the end of 40 years owns the unit gets to sell it to the next person at market rate rather than the below market rate. And they make a huge windfall. So there's actually a benefit to owning the unit at that time period. If I'm going to rent the unit, the present value of the future cash flow in this blip, if you will, in the rental rate, which is going to occur in 40 years, is almost nothing. So a developer really doesn't care too much about the affordability period. But I know that some communities, when 830G was first adopted, the affordability period was 20 years. Units are starting to fall off the affordable list now. And so communities that were above the 10% are falling below, and they're now subject to 830G again. And the issue is, if we're going to have affordable units, having these ephemeral units that come and go is really perhaps not in our long-term best interest. And what we might do is consider that we might have a longer affordability period for these units. I think the language that one community uses is 40 years or the life of the unit, whichever is longer.
Chris,
I
may I ask a
would
question?
agree.
How does this
Go ahead,
work
go
with,
ahead.
how does this work? So the Stony Brook units fell off, but they fell off for a different reason, correct? Or were they in the 20-year period?
I believe they were in the 40, their 40-year cycle ended.
So we wouldn't be in
Age
this
restriction.
predicament right now if we had this existing provision. Okay, I got it. I'm in for it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think this could be helpful.
Okay. So again, it'll be part of the recommendations for further discussion as we go. Page 31. So one of the issues that often concerns people with regard to development or housing development, particularly some of the conversations we've had about multifamily development, is what is this going to look like? So people's sense of zoning is some fear that a development that may come along will be so out of character with the community, it's sort of inappropriate or whatever. I heard, somebody in a community expressed to me that when they heard the word multifamily, they thought of Co-op City in New York. But in fact, what ended up in a community not unlike Stratford is smaller, two-story, thoughtful townhouses in a multifamily development. And so design guidelines is something that could help us guide future development in ways that are designed to fit into Stratford. I think the mayor had said in one of our earlier meetings that the redevelopment of the school site, that people didn't mind too much the architecture of, I think it was the townhouse units. They thought that that was appropriate. So if we could find ways to encourage or require development in ways that we know are going to fit into the fabric of Stratford, we might be able to accomplish our goals and objectives in terms of meeting housing needs, but in ways that, from a design perspective, enhances our community. So there are some communities that have done this in terms of some visual design guidelines. Do this, don't do that. There's some other communities that have done things in terms of words, etc. But I think it might be helpful for us overall to indicate that this is something we would also like to address as part of our affordable housing approach, is to either adopt design guidelines, as another community have done, or something else to help promote good design as part of this overall discussion. What are your thoughts and reactions to this?
Glenn, I just have to add one thing. So
Sure.
anything above 8 units will be automatically referred to our ARB, Architectural Review Board. And we do have commercial design guidelines in which we have a discussion on residential also, multifamily.
Yep.
It's a great idea. I am very impressed by the thoroughness of the review that the ARB members undertake for these. But also I have heard from a handful of attorneys and applicants on how, it's become a lengthier process for them, and they just, some people have been complaining that they just want what they want. So I'm all for it. And if we can add more into that existing document, as opposed to having another set of guidelines, I think that would be great.
Does the ARB have written design guidelines, Susmitha?
Yes, it's on the town webpage. It's called Architectural Review Board Commercial Design Guidelines. I'll send you the link.
If you would. And the reason why is that I may have missed that. So I noticed in the zoning regulations, we have design guidelines in the TOD district. And I thought it would be useful and helpful if we were able to extend that elsewhere. So if that already exists, then we're just going to want to reiterate that. So if you send me that link, I can figure out what to do with it. Are we really in favor of the concept of design guidelines for new developments, so to ensure the ARB process, et cetera, so that it fits into the character of Stratford? Yeah.
Yep.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Page 32. I'm not quite sure. Some communities have made it a policy program to try to seek relief from 830G. I think there have been changes in the statute over the years. I think Milford got an exemption or some additional language. Trumbull made a change in the statute, which now counts affordable accessory dwelling units of certain configurations, et cetera. I don't know, given the current direction that the legislature appears to be going, and the coming legislative session is likely to have at least one bill with regard to housing issues, whether this is a productive strategy for us. It may be like waving a red flag or a cape in front of a charging bull or something like that, but I certainly wanted to bring it up for discussion. For us to become exempt from 830G, we have to get to 10% of our housing stock. That means we have to produce 766 more units, and this actual calculation will recalibrate once the 2020 census results are released. If we want to get a moratorium for 4 years, we have to produce 420 or so housing unit equivalent points. Those are the two options which are really sort of available to us today to get some relief from 830J, or to change the definition in some way, shape, or form. What are your thoughts on these options? Go ahead, Beth.
I think that we should try to maybe not try to get up to the 10%, but to have those units that are occupied by low and moderate income households and were designated as affordable back as included as part of our affordability stock. Try to get, I don't know whether that would be a successful strategy. I'm getting quite the echo though here. I don't know if that would be successful, but I think it may be worth a try. I don't know what the jurisprudence is on that.
Other communities have expressed interest in naturally occurring affordable housing being counted. I mean, Stratford has thousands of units which are naturally affordable and in fact sell naturally below the affordable threshold, but they're not deed restricted. And that's the way the state has defined it. So I think that we can certainly point out that there's some inequity in the fact that we're already affordable, yet we're still subject to the act. But I'm not sure how fruitful that conversation is going to be given the certain tenor in the legislature. But I think we can point out the irony, if you will, that we're affordable, but the state says we're unaffordable.
It's a matter of lobbying, right? It's a matter of trying to get people to understand that. I think it's even more compelling coming from an affordable community than coming from a community where housing prices are less affordable. Laura's saying no.
I wish,
yeah.
I hear you, I agree with you, but it's not. And the cities are just not, and they have a majority of the votes, and they are just unwilling to relinquish this. And that's been our problem, because we are affordable and we shouldn't be subject to predatory development, but we are. And it doesn't matter because this is a standard that fits all. So I agree with you. I wish I could say it with a solid heart that this is the way we should go, but I think we should try to get that moratorium on the incremental basis using the 420 points, which I don't know how many units that equates to.
I think there is a table, Laura, which explains how many housing unit equivalent points you get for different types of units, and I'll put that in the report. I think the issue is since 1990, they have been tabulating. So I will look at the state information to figure out how many housing unit equivalent points Stratford may have today and how close we may be. And we may be able to get over the hump in terms of our first moratorium.
So do you think it's not even worth it? Try to team up with cities like Britain and Camden and
so we've tried.
Thanks.
Up to 2 years ago, we tried, and we just
Yeah.
couldn't get, and it had happened before that as well. And actually, the housing chairman from Waterbury was the last one who who championed some of the modifications to get to the moratorium level, and he was demoralized by his party's attacks on him personally. So it was hard. It was very hard. It's very
I'm
personal.
sorry, who was that?
Is Larry Butler from Waterbury.
And I think the conversation gets difficult too because of the racial overtones this past spring and summertime. There is this group created called Desegregate Connecticut, which has a fairly comprehensive and aggressive housing-related bill. They tried to get it on the governor's agenda for the special session in the summertime, weren't able to do so. They also tried to get it on in the fall, weren't able to do so. They're headed for September. One of the heads of the committee, her husband is the mayor of Hartford, and one of the other members of the committee, her husband is chair of, I believe he used to be chair of housing and P&D, but I think he's now chair of transportation, Representative Lamar. And so we have challenges that are going to change the landscape in a direction probably counter to what we're talking about. I don't know where the bill is going to go, but I think it's going to be a fairly contentious and significant discussion. And so I think it's probably prudent of us to kind of monitor what's happening there and be aware of the political realities as well. It's a very interesting time to be looking at this. I think.
But given there's that, I'm sorry, I just hate to drop this. I will after I say this. But given that there's that bill, having a counter bill could be productive, at least in terms of compromise. I mean, you don't want just that bill to exist.
We should never say never, right?
Right.
Beth, you're right. And we don't know what's going to happen this November. So I guess we have to take stock in who's elected and what the symbiotic nature is with those that are pushing the desegregate and then the affordable. But the desegregate Connecticut tact is really, and if we can communicate that message.
Laura, we're having some technical difficulties with you.
Statewide zoning.
But
I
would
know
love
that
to hear
people will be
what-
very hesitant.
Yeah, Laura, we were having some technical difficulties there. So some of the most operative clauses in what you were saying were the parts that were dropped. So could you give us an executive summary?
I'm sorry, this desegregate Connecticut is going to polarize a lot of communities because it is statewide zoning. And, we're very parochial. I mean, let's be frank. And
We're a home rule state.
Pardon me? We are.
We're a home rule state is the more technical term, yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of angst, strife, polarizing proposals. So I don't know if the 830G changes are going to be met at all. I don't even know if they get out of housing committee, but I don't want to discourage anybody. We should never say never.
I agree with the mayor. I was chairman of the legislative committee of the planners in Connecticut at one point in time. And what we discovered was that zoning was such fertile ground that there were some bills that would filter through the various committees, et cetera, and get held up so that other legislative committees and groups could place amendments on them as part of the process. So it becomes a very, very challenging situation and generally gets decided in the last few days of the session in the dark of night, simply because that's sort of the way that the dynamics work. Chris, we're at 1:58 here. I do think, as I look at where we're at in the chapter, with one more meeting, we can be through this and I can revise the document in a way which I think you'll see reflects our conversations. Does next Thursday work for you, or you're saying that it does not work for you and we need to find another day?
I'm going to see if I can watch those, take the training course post-event. Usually they're pretty good about it, and making the videos available now, thanks to our sort of convoluted life now. So let's leave it right now. And so hopefully we can get through that. And I know, just as an FYI, while we're talking, that it looks like we have a date set for the joint land use meeting.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's November 17th. So we'll have some time to, get organized prior to that.
So if we're able to complete the booklet next week, I would see us taking a week off and then having a draft document back for you to review, refine, etc. It'll be much more compact than what you've seen so far. But the
Yep.
basic idea is to summarize in a format suitable for sharing with the joint planning and zoning meeting and other groups in town our current thought process moving forward the week after that. And then that would set us up, I think, for the November meeting with some time to spare. So I think that's what I see going forward. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, a motion to adjourn. We should probably do that.
I'll second it.
So moved.
So moved by Laura, second.
Second.
Second, Elizabeth, I guess. All in favor, say
Yes,
aye.
thank you. Aye.
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 Okay, we're adjourned at 2 p.m. Have a good rest of your week, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks,
You too.
everybody.
Everyone. Have a good night. Get this.